Before your grandfather bought something new, he usually asked one question first. Can it be fixed? That question sounds simple, almost too simple. But I think it built a different kind of person, because when a thing broke in an old house, people did not always rush to replace it. They looked at it, turned it over, studied the crack, the loose screw, the worn handle, the torn seam, the part that had failed. And before money left the house, somebody tried to make the thing work again. Not because they were poor in spirit, not because they loved inconvenience, and not because the past was perfect. No, they did it because useful things still deserved a chance. That is one of the biggest differences between our grandparents and us. Modern life trained people to ask, where can I buy another one? The old way asked, can it be fixed? And I'll say it straight. Those two questions create two different kinds of families. One family depends on a store, a delivery truck, and a payment method. The other family at least tries to depend on its own hands first. That does not mean every broken thing can be saved. Some things are done, fine. But modern life moved the line too far. Now we throw away things before we even understand what failed. A chair gets loose and it becomes trash. A shirt tears and it disappears. A handle cracks and the whole tool gets replaced. Something stops working and half the time nobody in the house even opens it up to look. That would have bothered a lot of our grandparents. Not because they hated new things. They did not. They bought tools. They ordered parts. They used catalogs. They accepted progress when it actually helped. But they did not confuse buying with solving. There is a difference. Buying can make a problem disappear for a while. Repair teaches you what the problem was. And that is where modern life has made us softer than we like to admit. Not weak by nature, just less practiced. Because every time a family replaces before it understands, a little bit of useful intelligence leaves the house. Your grandfather may not have used fancy words for that. He might have just walked out to the shed, found the old coffee can, dug around for a screw that looked close enough, and made the thing hold. That was not glamorous. It was better than glamorous. It was useful. And useful used to matter more. During the Great Depression, that question, can it be fixed, was not a lifestyle choice. It was survival. When money got thin, repair was not a hobby. It was what stood between a family and doing without. A pair of shoes did not get tossed because the sole complained. A chair did not leave the house because one rung got loose. A tool did not become junk because the handle cracked. Somebody in that home would try. That word matters. Try. Modern life does not like that word very much. It likes warranty. It likes replacement. It likes upgrade. It likes convenience. Trying takes patience. Trying means you might fail. Trying means you might spend an hour with a thing and still not get it right. But it also teaches you something. And our grandparents were taught by the things they had to keep alive. A house back then was not just a place you lived. It was a place that demanded attention. Doors swelled in wet weather. Stoves needed tending. Handles loosened. Clothes wore thin. Tools got dull. Fences leaned. A family learned the house by answering those little problems before they turned into big ones. That kind of life made people observant. You started noticing sounds. A hinge that did not swing right. A floorboard that felt different. A tool that had lost its bite. A machine that was not running the way it did last week. Today, many people do not notice until something stops completely. And then the answer is usually outside the home. Call somebody, order something, replace it, wait, pay, There is no shame in getting help. There is no shame in using a professional when you need one. But a family that has no first response of its own is not as free as it thinks. That is what bothers me. Modern life sells convenience as freedom. But sometimes convenience is just dependence with nicer packaging. Our grandparents understood ownership differently. If you owned something, you were expected to know it a little. Not every detail, not like an engineer, but enough to respect it. A man who owned a shovel knew when the handle was splitting. A woman who owned a good coat knew whether a seam could be saved. A family that owned a table did not throw it away the first time it wobbled. They tightened it. They shimmed it. They fixed it well enough to keep sitting down together. That is not just about objects. That is about character. Because repair teaches a person to slow down before giving up. And a society that forgets repair starts giving up on everything faster. Tools, clothes, furniture, skills, sometimes even people. Now, I know that sounds like a big jump. Maybe it is. But think about it. When a culture teaches you that broken means worthless, that lesson does not stay in the garage. It gets into the way people see the world. Our grandparents were not sentimental about everything. They could be hard people, practical people, but many of them had an instinct we lost. They did not confuse worn with useless. They did not confuse old with finished. They understood that a thing could be scarred and still serve. And there is wisdom in that. I can picture a grandfather sitting at a workbench with one good lamp, a cracked handle in front of him, and a look on his face like the problem is personal now. He is not angry, not dramatic, just focused. He knows the store might sell another one, but he also knows the store is not the first answer. So he wraps it, pins it, sands it, fits a piece where the old one gave out. Maybe it lasts another month. Maybe it lasts another year. Maybe one day it gets replaced anyway. But the man has done something modern life tries to take away from people. He has practiced competence. That is a serious thing. Competence is not loud. It does not need to brag. It just shows up when something breaks and says, "Let me look at it first." Some of you were raised around people like that. You remember the shed. You remember the drawer nobody was allowed to clean out. You remember the old man who kept parts from things that no longer existed, and somehow, years later, he would use one of them. As a child, you may have thought it was junk. Now you know better. It was not junk. It was a private supply chain. It was his way of making sure the house did not have to surrender every time something small went wrong. And the women had their own version of it. A sewing basket could keep a family clothed longer than a person today might believe. A patch on work pants was not humiliation. It was common sense. A button saved from an old shirt was not clutter. It was an answer waiting for the right problem. But here's the part I want to be careful with. I am not saying old families repaired everything because life was wonderful. Sometimes they repaired because they had no choice. Sometimes there was no money. Sometimes there was no store close enough. Sometimes pride had to bend because the children still needed shoes. That is true. We do not need to make hardship look pretty. But we also do not need to ignore the strength that hardship produced. Our grandparents learned to keep things working because life did not hand them replacements every time something got inconvenient. And that gave them a kind of steadiness modern people often admire, but rarely practice. In 1932, a man named Bernard London published a proposal called Ending the Depression Through Planned Obsolescence. His idea was extreme. He argued that products should have limited lives so people would keep buying and industry would keep moving. Now, I am not saying every company followed one man's paper. That would be too easy and too sloppy. But the idea matters because it shows something changing in the American mind. A broken object was no longer just a household problem. It became part of a bigger economic question. What happens when families keep things too long? What happens when people repair instead of replacing? What happens when a good chair lasts 30 years? Modern industry has never been fully comfortable with that kind of household independence. Because a family that repairs buys less. A family that reuses shops slower. A family that can make do is harder to pressure. That does not mean there is some shadowy villain behind every broken toaster. It means the incentives changed. The old home wanted things to last. Modern commerce often wants things to move, and those are not the same thing. You can feel that difference today. A phone battery gets weak, and the whole device starts feeling disposable. A small appliance fails, and replacement looks cheaper than repair. A machine has one electronic part go bad, and suddenly the owner is told it is not worth fixing. Maybe sometimes that is true, but sometimes it is only true because we built a world where repair was made inconvenient on purpose. That is why the right to repair argument exists now. Not because people want to live in the past, because many people are tired of owning things they are not really allowed or able to fix. Think about how strange that is. A man can pay for something, bring it into his home, depend on it, care for it, and still be told that repairing it is not really his business. Our grandparents would have had a hard time swallowing that, not because they understood every modern device, they would not, but because the principle would sound wrong. If it is yours, you ought to be able to try. That sentence feels old-fashioned now. Maybe it should not. There is a dignity in trying, even when you fail, especially when you fail, because failure teaches the shape of the thing. It teaches where the stress goes. It teaches what cheap material looks like. It teaches which tools matter. It teaches patience. Patience is another thing modern life has quietly drained from the house. When everything can be replaced quickly, waiting feels like punishment. But repair requires waiting. You wait for glue to set. You wait for the right part. You wait while your hands learn what your head thought it already knew. That is why a repaired thing carries more meaning than a new thing sometimes. A repaired chair is not just furniture. It remembers the person who refused to give up on it. A patched coat is not just cloth. It carries the winter it got through. A sharpened tool is not just metal. It says somebody cared enough to keep it ready. Now compare that with the modern habit of replacing before we feel anything. There is a kind of emptiness in it. The broken thing leaves, the new thing arrives. Nothing is learned, nothing is remembered. The house stays dependent, and the person becomes a little less capable than he could have been. That is the real cost, not just money, capacity. A home used to be full of small capacities. Somebody could mend, somebody could sharpen, somebody could patch, somebody could tighten a loose thing before it became useless. Not everyone could do everything. That is not the point. The point is that the knowledge lived close enough to be used. In the hands of parents, in the habits of grandparents, in the neighbor down the road who knew more than he ever said. Today, when something breaks, many families do not have a person to ask. They have a search bar. And I am grateful for search bars. I use them. You probably do too. But there is a difference between finding information and growing judgment. A video can show you how a stranger fixed his problem. Judgment tells you whether that will work on your problem, with your tools, in your house, under your weather, with your money. That is what elders used to offer, not just information, judgment. And that may be what I miss most, the quiet confidence of people who had fixed enough things to know when something was worth saving and when it was truly done. There is honesty in that too. Repair culture was not about pretending everything could last forever. It was about refusing to surrender too soon. That is the balance this channel cares about, not fantasy, not nostalgia for misery, just a little respect for the old question. Can it be fixed? That question could save a family money, but more than that, it could save a family from becoming helpless. Because every repair, even a small one, tells the house something. We still have hands. We still have sense. We are not done just because something broke. That is a powerful message, and it is one modern life does not repeat often enough. Modern life tells people to upgrade. Our grandparents taught people to maintain. That word is not exciting, maintain. It sounds plain, but most good things depend on it. A marriage needs maintaining. A house needs maintaining. A tool needs maintaining. A body needs maintaining. A community needs maintaining. Nothing useful stays useful by accident. Our grandparents understood that because their lives were full of things that demanded care. You could not ignore the stove all winter and expect comfort. You could not neglect the roof and act surprised when rain found its way in. You could not let a tool stay dull and then blame the tool for poor work. That kind of life told the truth. Care now or pay later. Modern life delays that truth with credit, delivery, warranties, and distractions. But it does not erase it. Eventually, every family learns whether it knows how to maintain what matters. That is why this old question still matters. Can it be fixed? Ask it before you replace. Ask it before you throw away. Ask it before you assume the store has the only answer. Maybe the answer is no. Fine. But at least you looked. At least you respected the thing enough to understand why it failed. At least you practiced being useful for a little while. And if you grew up with somebody who lived that way, you know exactly what I mean. Maybe your grandfather had a workbench that looked like chaos to everyone else, but made perfect sense to him. Maybe your grandmother had a sewing tin that could save a shirt before church on Sunday morning. Maybe your father kept a lawnmower alive for 20 years out of stubbornness and skill. Maybe your mother could make an old piece of furniture look cared for again without buying anything new. I want to hear about that because those stories are not small. They are evidence that the old way did not die because it failed. A lot of it disappeared because replacing became easier than remembering. And easier is not always better. Sometimes easier just makes us less involved in our own lives. Our grandparents were not backward. They were prepared. They knew that a family with a few tools, a little patience, and one person willing to try was not as fragile as a family that had to buy its way out of every problem. That is the lesson I want to leave you with. The next time something breaks, do not rush past it too fast. Look at it for a minute. Ask the old question, can it be fixed? Maybe it can. Maybe it cannot. But the asking matters. because that question keeps something alive in a person: attention, patience, usefulness, and maybe even a little humility. So tell me this: what did your grandfather, grandmother, father, mother, or neighbor fix that most people today would throw away? Not the perfect story, the real one. The chair that held another 10 years. The old mower that should have died twice. The coat that got patched until it became part of the family. The tool that looked ugly but worked better than the new one. I want to read those memories. And if this brought back a little respect for the old sheds, old sewing baskets, old coffee cans, and the people who knew how to make things last, leave your like. It helps this channel keep those memories breathing a little longer. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next video, Lord willing.